Okay, here we are. This is class for Wednesday, the 30th of August, and we're starting to study our first piece of Talmud. But before we do that, we need to go to the Mishnah that's connected with this piece of Talmud. And before we even do that, we have to first look at something the Torah says, and we'll see how the Mishnah kind of reacts to what the Torah says or has additions to that. So here we go. We're going to start. We're going to start with the Torah piece here, which says, "When you sell property to a neighbor or buy anything from your neighbor, altonu one another." So first of all, first question is, what do you think the word altonu means? Remember, you're answering these questions and sending them to me via email, slight@tarbut.com. So question number one, what do you think altonu means here? And here is actually the definition of altonu: yana, to oppress, suppress, treat violently, maltreat. So what do you think is actually happening here? That's question number two. What does it mean to oppress or suppress or treat violently one another when you're talking about selling property to a neighbor? All right, and now we're going to look at the context to better understand kind of the word, what this word means. And to do this, we're going to have to look at two concepts in Jewish law called Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and Yovel, the Jubilee year. And what happens there, first of all, every how many years? Shemitah actually happens in the seventh year. We know that actually university professors have sabbaticals every seventh year, and the Shabbat is every seventh day. So this is a sabbatical for the land. So every seventh year is Shemitah. Every 50th year, 7 times 7 plus 1, is the Jubilee year. If you were a slave and it came to the Shemitah year, you became free. Also in the Yovel year, if you were crops during the Shemitah year, if you grew crops, those crops don't belong to you during the Shemitah year. You can eat from them as well as anyone else can eat from them as well. So it's kind of open to all. The same applies during the Yovel year. If you bought a house, nothing happens during the Shemitah year, but during the Yovel year, actually, that house is sent back to the original owner, not sold back, but actually given back to the original owner. If you had a loan that you had not repaid during your the Yovel year, that loan gets kind of null and void. You no longer have to pay it anymore. Oops, sorry. If you Um, how is it announced? Shemitah year isn't really announced, but the Yovel year is announced by that final shofar blast at the end of Yom Kippur. Even though that's a common custom for the end of Yom Kippur, it's actually there to announce the Yovel year. When was the last Shemitah year? It happened in 2021, so every 7 years. And when was the last Yovel year? Well, actually, we don't practice Yovel because the Torah talks about it being for all of its inhabitants, meaning that everyone, for some reason, all of its inhabitants all the Jewish people have to be living in Israel for the Yovel to be active. Probably is very, very hard for the Yovel to actually happen. So when we talk about our phrase, do not oppress someone or do not suppress someone when buying and selling, this is what the Torah is saying. It's saying, suppose the year was 2020 and the Yovel year is happening in 2070. So, right, that's 50 years after this. And you sold a house for 600,000 K in 2020. So the what they're talking about here is, so now suppose you had a house, the same house, and it was 2066. Could you sell that house for $600,000, knowing, by the way, that what's going to happen in 2070? The house that you just sold is going to come back to whom? That's question number three. Right, it comes back to you because of the Yovel year. So is it right to sell that house for $600,000? Some people in class were saying, yeah, if the buyer is willing to buy it for that, that's fine. But you basically, if you didn't tell that buyer, you knew that the Yovel year was coming. You knew it would come back to you. So in a way, that is how you would be oppressing someone and buying and selling. When you have information that you know that you're not divulging, and that allows you to make more of a profit than you should be. And so how would you translate the word altonu now? That's question number 4. I'm just writing down the questions here, so I haven't. I can kind of check them afterwards. So ona'ah is the noun form that comes from this verb altonu, ona'ah, which we're going to call kind of overcharging, at least at this point. Maybe we'll change that definition. We're going to call it overcharging. And the Mishnah says the following: ona'ah. The Mishnah is going to talk about this idea of ona'ah, and it's saying they're giving a definition of how much it is. Ona'ah is 4 coins from 24 coins, or 1/6 of the price of an item. So if something costs $24, if I sold that item for more than $28, I'm guilty of ona'ah. I've sold it for more of a profit than it's worth, 1/6 more than over 1/6 more than it's worth. Anything below that I can sell. So it's basically saying at a garage sale, right? At a garage sale, according to Jewish law, my profit margin can be no more than 17%, or what Aaron said, 16.6666%. Now the Mishnah also says 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 yesh halokeach echad halokeach ve'echad hamocher yesh lahem ona'ah. Not only the seller has it can be guilty of ona'ah, but the buyer can also be guilty of ona'ah. So my next question, number 5, is how could a buyer be guilty of ona'ah? So a buyer could be guilty of ona'ah by basically going to a garage sale and knowing that the coin that they see there, they know it's being, even though it's being sold for $5, they know it's worth $2,000, and they know they could probably turn around and sell it for $2,000. So they're like, oh my goodness, I have information that the seller doesn't have. I'm going to go ahead and buy it for and and get an amazing amount of profit. So, I mean, the next question is, so that's basically not allowed. That would be considered ona'ah. If I have information that the seller has, or if the buyer has information that the seller's information that the buyer doesn't have, those would be considered ona'ah. So, by the way, does that mean you could never have a garage sale? Actually, you could have a garage sale and still not be guilty of ona'ah. How might that be? Question number 6. You could not have ona'ah by basically saying, hey, by being honest, right? The seller has to say, hey, I'm selling this for $10, but probably it's only worth $2, or like, look at this, the thing that's a little bit wrong with it. The stuffing's coming out of the stuffed animal, or the coffee maker needs a new battery or something like that, or the guitar needs some new strings. And if you're honest about that and saying, I'm selling it for this, but you need to know that it might not be worth that much. And then the seller can say, actually, no, it's worth that much to me. The buyer can say, I'm gonna buy it. Or the seller kind of has to say before they buy it, and say, you could probably sell this for more on eBay, or you could probably sell this more at the thrift store down the road. And the seller can say, yeah, I know that, but I have to leave town in an hour, and I'm just trying to get rid of everything as fast as possible. So I realize that I'm not getting the best prices. So honesty subverts ona'ah, but it's saying if I have information that I'm not divulging, then all of a sudden I can be guilty of ona'ah, either as a seller or as a buyer. Now, so here's something interesting. So here we have this law that I just showed you. When you sell property to your neighbor, or you buy anything from your neighbor, all tonu one another. Do not, okay, we just saw that. But actually, 3 psukim later, in pasuk number 17, in sentence number 17, it says, Al tonu one another, but fear your God, for I, God, am your God. But we just talked about Al tonu. Why is it that actually we're talking about it again? And of course, we talked about this idea of omni-significance, or this idea of of God is not a blabbermouth, meaning if the Torah is talking again about altonu, it can't be talking about the same thing again. It has to be talking about something different. So what might that be something different? And the trick to kind of understanding this is the word selling property. Selling property above, but we don't have that in 17. So we're no longer talking about business dealings, but there can be trickery in other ways. What might another way be? That's question number 7. Okay. And one little hint for this is these words, but fear your God. And Rashi says the following. You might say, how can anyone check if I really meant to prove to do something bad? No one can prove it, and I can always deny it. This is why the Torah needs to say, but fear your God. God knows the thoughts of all. God knows the truth of the matter. This is why in all cases where no one knows truth except the person who has the good or bad thoughts in his heart, the Torah always states, but fear your God. So these words, Vayareta Elokecha, but fear your God is not just doesn't just happen here, but happens many places in the Torah. And it's always talking about something that's in here, where you know the truth and no one else knows really what your heart or your mind is thinking at the time. So that's different than selling property, because selling property, I can go to a friend and say, "How is it? Was this a fair purchase?" Or I can go to an expert and say, "Was this a fair purchase?" And then if they say no, you were totally duped, you were totally hoodwinked, you were totally tricked, you can go back and reverse that. And actually, the Mishnah actually says, how long do I have to return an object if I feel like I've been deceived? And it says, as long as it takes you to go to a relative or to go to an expert and double check the price. And then you'll think to yourself, oh, I'm returning it. I was totally duped, or no, I'm not returning it. I'm really happy with this. So this is talking about, it's not talking about property. It's ona'ah. That's not talking about buying and selling stuff, and it's ona'ah that you have in your mind that no one else can prove. So what is that? Any example of what that might be? And here's the Mishnah that comes next. Kishem, just like that there is ona'ah b'mekach umimkar, just like in business dealings there can be ona'ah. In the same way, there can be ona'ah with devarim. Not devarim sometimes means things, but here it means like lidhaber, words, with words. Ona'ah with words. What do you think that actually means? What might ona'ah with words actually mean? Question number 8. Okay. And here we get what the Mishnah says, and I love this Mishnah because it's so practical and so relevant and so honest. It says, here's 3 examples of ona'ah with words. What is ona'ah with words? Lo yomar lo bekama chefetze. You can't walk into a store and say to a person, "How much is that item?" V'hu eno rotze likach, and but your intention is you do not want to buy that item. I mean, you can't go into a store and say, um, "Tell me about this item. I want to know about it. How much is this? How much is that?" When I know from the get-go that I'm going to buy it on Amazon. Now, you might be able to say, Mr. Store Owner, I'm coming into your store. I'm looking around. I'm probably going to buy whatever I buy from Amazon, but show me around. And then that owner can say, well, I better deal with someone who's actually going to buy something from me from my store. Don't waste my time. Or they can say, hey, no one's here. Let me tell you about it. Maybe you will end up buying from me because I have really good prices. But you cannot walk into a store and basically use the time of a person. So how is that? Why would that be ona'at devarim? That's question number 9. I love this law because I go so often to the store and like I'm not totally honest with what I'm saying to the person who's there, and I'm exploiting them, right? I'm using their time. I'm kind of stealing time from them where they could be talking with someone else. So I always have to push myself to say I need to be honest. I need to tell them what I'm probably going to end up doing, and maybe I'll be surprised. Okay. Um, The next case of onat avarim. Im haya bal tshuva. If someone wasn't religious and they became a bal tshuva is a name for someone who decides to be religious again. Lo yomar lo. Don't say to that person, Zuchur ma'asecha rishonim. Don't say to that person, I remember when you weren't religious. Don't remind that person of when they weren't the way they are. What might be a modern day example of this? Not talking about someone who is Baal Tshuva, but someone who is changed in another way. That's question number 10. Okay, and our last thing of Ona'at Devarim is Im Hu Ben Gerim. If he actually has converted, if he has decided to become Jewish, and he wasn't Jewish before, lo yomar lo zechor ma'asecha avotecha. Don't say to him, I remember what your parents and great parents and great parents were. You're not allowed to remind them of their past in some way. Why is that, by the way? Why would that be ona'ah? Why would reminding someone of their past in both example number 2 and 3 be considered ona'ah? And that's really where we got to today. The final question, actually, which I thought was kind of a hard one, which I'm not quite sure we answered so well in class, but it was why would the Mishnah bring up? I understand example number 1 and how it's different from 2 and 3, but 2 and 3 seem really, really similar. If someone wasn't religious, if they were Jewish, they said wasn't religious and they became religious, don't remind them of a time, or don't say to them like, I remember when you weren't religious. And the next one is if someone wasn't Jewish and is Jewish, don't remember and became Jewish, don't remind them of the time when they weren't Jewish. Both of them seem to be kind of saying, I am reminding you of what you used to be. So why would the Mishnah actually say both these lines? What is the difference between them? And that's question number 12. And that's it for the day. So thanks so much for answering these questions. Send me via an email your answers, and I'll change your grade if you got a 0.